Hi everyone and welcome. So this is not the normal time that we would be doing a live, but Jess had some internet problems last time and we lost her. So pleased to welcome back for part two, Jessica Hannah. And we were talking about the equine ethology, and we'd covered some really interesting points, and all of this will be pieced back together into one seamless broadcast at some point in time. So we're going to pick up where we left off. So we were talking, Jess, about the temperament of the horse being one of the 8 success factors. Might actually, before we launch straight into temperament, why don't you tell us a little bit about these 8 factors and where they've come from and why you like to use those when it comes to a happy, successful partnership?
So personally, for me, I like to be quite logical with the horse, and say with equitation science, I can be logical with the horse and say work with horses in a pretty safe way. So the influences of training, which Andrew McLean also thinks is uh, Andrew McLean uses these 8 influences in his book called Equitation Science, and that's learning process and ability, because horses take quite long to learn. So we need to have so much patience for them to understand anything. Human knowledge, horses conformation, human biomechanics and balance, and I can't remember the other ones, Jenny, that I was speaking about.
Don't worry, they'll come back. So we're just going to recap. So we've already talked about in our previous live where we got you before you started to spit. We were talking about the learning processes and the ability, and talking about how we need to do things little and often.
Yeah.
We did discuss human knowledge and skills, and like you don't know what you don't know, and you can only do the best with what you do know. That's cool. Temperament of the horse and willingness to try is something that we wanted to just touch on some more before we go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So if you talk us through that, it will come back to you. It's absolutely fine, I promise. We'll get back into flow, and it'll all be good again.
Perfect. So with the horse's temperament, this is where you can speak about more about a horse's personality, because obviously some horses are more sensitive than others, and how you ride one is not necessarily how you will ride your own. So it's quite important that we learn to adapt, so we don't create a stressful situation. So if you do have a sensitive horse, you're not going to ride it in spurs, for example. And it's quite important to know when to let your horse have a break and relax, because obviously that will also aid in successful training.
Okay, cool. So the willingness to try, then, what's that all about? How do we know how willing to try our horse is?
So it's to do, say, with like motivation. So what motivates your horse? Most horses are quite food orientated, but you do get the odd one which just loves their owner and just wants to be around them. So the willingness is literally just how willing the horse is to do his trial and error process of learning.
So what about things like when they're not willing because they are either in pain, or they're not willing because they don't understand, or because they think they're gonna be? So maybe previously they were in pain. How can we determine the difference between a horse that is willing to learn and give things a go, and actually a horse that's having difficulty at that point, or has got some issues perhaps underlying?
Yep. So before you do anything with horses, you should really do like a health check and make sure there is no underlying issues. And then, say if you are experiencing conflict behaviour, you do need to look at yourself and see if possibly you're not asking the horse correctly, or asking in a way that the horse understands. Because say when a horse does have conflict behavior, he is trying to tell us something, and he's just trying to tell us the only way he knows how, which is horse-like ninja moves, I suppose.
Okay, and so what would you call conflict behaviour then? How do you know when your horse is conflict behaviour? Because I mean, there's obvious conflict behaviour like kicking and biting, bucking and rearing, things like that. But then there's the less obvious as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So say if you are heavy-handed in your reins, or maybe you're riding a horse that you have to ride into a contact rather than, just wiggle the reins and he'll hold his head for you. So a conflict behavior there might be he's like shaking his head slightly, or he'll be quite tense where obviously he's not carrying himself the way he wants to. And say canter transitions are a good one. Some horses, if you're not sat in the right place, then they will throw in a cheeky bark and and ask you politely to sit properly, I suppose.
Okay, cool. So it sounds to me it's like a little bit like you need to know what's normal for your horse to know what isn't.
Yeah, and that's the advantage we have is as owners is we do know our horses. Well, we'll know them better than a vet does. So say if the vet comes over and you can see that your horse is getting slightly stressed out, then you can give him a wither scratch, or you can give him like some treats to make a positive sort of experience if he's feeling nervous or anxious.
Okay, cool. So these are all things that we are talking about in order to have a happy and successful partnership. So this is how to have a happy horse is what we're discussing. Yeah. And so why is it really important that you know this stuff in order to have a happy horse?
Well, the main thing is the way we manage horses, we are responsible for their welfare. So the least, well, what most people should do is just try and create the least stressful sort of environment for the horse. And if you compete your horse, having a happy horse means he'll jump anything for you, really.
Yeah, okay, which brings us beautifully on then to equine health and soundness, because it's not all about having a happy horse, is it? They could be, well, there aren't many actually that are that happy but are unsound or not very healthy, but they are very good at disguising it, aren't they? And so tell us a little bit about what you mean by health and soundness, and also why is it that the horses disguise stuff the way they do, though? Why would they do that? That sounds crazy, but they do, don't they?
Yeah. So horses are very good at trying to hide any pain or discomfort, and this just goes back down to like evolution when they had predators chasing them and stuff, and no one wants to be seen as the weak one in the herd. So the equine health and soundness, like happy hoof, happy horse, your horse has to sort of like have good feet, and this is where say sort of diet comes into it, and say seasonal changes. I know quite a lot of people who don't necessarily change the amount they feed their horse in the autumn, and that's when, say, like the wild ponies, for example, they tend to put more weight on, and the thick coats come through, and I've completely messed that bit up.
That's all right. Just chat to us anyway. It's cool. It's fine. Yeah. Just chat away. So because our horses aren't affected by seasons the way they used to be, because they are now kept in paddocks rather than roaming around.
Yeah, and we do do a lot of thermal regulating with like rugs and clipping. And obviously, it's easier for a horse to warm up than it is to cool down. So yeah, it's just us as owners and sort of handlers to just be responsible.
That's cool. Okay. And but we can only do what we know, can't we? So you've only got the knowledge that you've got. And if you're listening to this and thinking or watching and thinking, yeah, know all this stuff, this is cool, then that's great. Tick it off. Are we doing it? Is there a bit that there's a red flag? Is it all right? If you're thinking, oh, that's different, I hadn't really heard of that, or oh no, that's not what I learned years ago, or what have you, what would you say to people? Because there's a lot of, well, that's how it's always been, so it must be correct kind of thinking in the horse world sometimes, isn't it? What would you kind of say to people that are a bit like, well, that's not in the manual, but actually we now know to be true?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to remember, say like horse riding, it is quite traditional. You will always get those hardcore people who were like, well, this is what I did like 40 years ago. which might have worked for them, but there's nothing wrong with just the way like the horse evolved for us to evolve the way we do stuff with horses. And say people who aren't on side with science, like
I think this brings us really nicely onto the fact we're always learning, though, doesn't it? And a lot of the people that say, "Oh, well, I did that 40 years ago, and this, that, and the other," it's simply that they haven't updated their knowledge, either because they didn't think that they needed to, or because they know it. So why would they need to update it? But the thing about learning is that we're always doing it, isn't it? And sometimes we even have to question the stuff that we think is true and is right, and just go, "What is that? Do I need to check in on that? Is there something else? Has anything come along more recently, contrary to what we thought? Is it now different?" Let's take feeding, for instance. Typical one, isn't it? Like, don't feed before you ride. Well, okay, they were talking about hard feed, weren't they, straight? But, it's a feeding rule. Whereas now, actually, it's for ulcer-prone horses, or for any horse, really. Get fibre in its stomach before you ride. Stop the acid slushing around. It's a much better thing. But they're two completely contradictory things, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, what would you say about this idea of updating your learning, or learning, and what have you enjoyed about learning this much about horses and not just kind of reading the manual and thinking that must be the answer?
So the best way I can sort of explain it is I recently acquired a foal. The place I work, the lady decided to have a foal, and it came way sooner than we had planned. And say the equitation science side of things, even though I don't know what I'm doing with this foal, I think I've done a pretty good job at producing like a little gentleman, really. And he is quite a big colt, and obviously because he's still a baby, we have our good moments and we have our bad moments, but thankfully we're having more good than bad. So it's just finding what you're comfortable doing and being confident in it enough that, say, if people don't agree with you, it doesn't matter, because you know what you're doing is right, and you know that the horse isn't in distress.
Cool. Okay. So they have got to be happy and sound and healthy. I mean, that's kind of a given, really, isn't it? There's no real surprise that in the happy horse partnership, happy hound and selfie. That's brilliant, isn't it? Happy, sound, and healthy is an important part of it. You could say the same with the humans, really, couldn't you? We need to be healthy, sound, like, not crippled or anything, as much as possible. Although, quite frankly, actually, if there's things wrong with our body, we can still ride as well. That's the wonderful thing about it. But like, healthy and sound is quite important, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 4 we've gone through now. What are some of the other points then of a happy, healthy relationship, and how we can use that to make ourselves as successful as possible in this sport, hobby, whatever you want to call it, partnership, whatever it's about for you?
Well, let's talk about training environment. So if you think about it in a way that when you are with a horse, you are both in close physical and psychological proximity, and because of that, it can be quite intense experience for the horse. So this comes back to being able to tell when your horse needs a break, and say if he's not understanding what you're asking him, can you simplify that even further and break it down further for him to have a chance to understand, and for him to what's the word? Can't think of it now, but it will come to me.
So there's this concept again then of break it down. So if you don't understand it, don't just stand looking at it. Break it down, work out what the pieces that might be missing. Then you might find the key to it in breaking that down and making it easier, smaller chunks to digest.
Yeah.
Cool. Same with human learning, really, to be fair.
Yeah, pretty much the same with human learning.
Cool. Okay. So what do you mean by the training environment itself then? The environmental element of it? Because most of us, when you say training environment, most of us think of a school, an arena, or a field, maybe a ramp pen, whatever it is.
Yeah. So I think it's just where I've done the equitation science that I'll call any interaction with a horse training, because every time you are with your horse is learning something. And it's quite important, say, when you are working with your horse, that you do create this sort of positive association, because say every time you ride a horse and you kick it really hard with spurs and you use the whip, at some point the horse is not going to want to be ridden. And yeah, it's just being aware of the horse's emotions, really. And although, say, research is lacking into like the horse's mind, but we do know horses are sentient, and I think that's enough for us to sort of respect the horse, you know.
And I love the fact that we talk about that horses are sentient beings. But I've had people say, well, what does sentient even mean? Like, how can you say it's a sentient being? What does that mean? So, what's your take on what a sentient being is?
Uh, they can feel pain and pleasure, um, and I know for a fact my horse knows when I'm upset, or say if I'm annoyed, then he's a very good boy.
Yeah, they definitely do, and I think that's part of why we love them, isn't it? Because they do pick up on what's going on for us, and they'll either mirror it back to us or they'll take it in, one or the other, won't they? And they're just fabulous. Okay, cool. So we've got the training environment. What other aspects? So we're on 5, so we've got 3 left to go now, of things that we can consider and take into account when it comes to a happy, healthy, successful partnership.
Have we talked about rider biomechanics and balance?
No, we have not actually. Interestingly enough, we've not. That's so important, and in fact, an entire podcast and Q&A was done on this, and many more will come as well. So the rider biomechanics and balance. Let's talk about why that's important, shall we?
So say when we are riding's not necessarily a natural thing for the horse. So it's quite important for us, if we're on top, that we are balanced. And if you've ever been unfortunate enough to be on a horse who has taken a big trip in the arena and fallen flat on your face, then you will know how important balance is. But
What about how much the rider influences? So if we think about what riding is us influencing the horse to get the desired outcome. It might not always get the desired outcome, but that's the aim of it, isn't it? So what about this concept of the rider being balanced, and the way that the mechanics of the rider's body is influencing the horse for better or for worse?
yeah. So if you think of a rider as something constantly applying pressure and taking away pressure to the horse, and if you think about it as like a piece of, when they say when you're learning to ride, you're carrying like a water tray. So obviously, if you aren't balanced enough, you're going to spill this water tray. And especially when we are asking our horses transitions, and you are riding a more sensitive horse, then you need to know what you're doing with your body, so you can ask the horse clearly what school movement, or asking him to change transitions.
So what about the situations where you've got a green horse and a rider that obviously doesn't know what they don't know? So they might not be a green rider, they might not be a particularly novice rider, but they don't know how to ask that of their horse. What in that situation, what kind of is the stuff that can go well, and what's the stuff that can potentially go wrong?
So I don't know. I say people having green horses, it's a very opinionated topic, I think, but I don't see anything wrong. Say if you do have a horse and you're not sure what to do, then just do stuff with it and walk. Like, you don't need to try and get him to canter straight away, especially if he's a green horse. Just go back to basics again. And the more you ride your horse and the more you sort of do training with him, you'll get to know him a bit more, and then you'll be able to I can't think.
It's fine, don't worry, we'll have days like this. It's perfectly all right. It's fine. So the more you get to know your horse, the more you're going to be able to help him understand. You need to be able to break it down, and just learn together. Then basically, as long as it's not dangerous in that partnership.
Yeah, and say if you don't particularly know like a horse well, or if it is like a young horse, I think it's quite important to just focus on like having a positive experience in those cases, and then obviously once you get more like comfortable in each other's company, then obviously you can go ahead and do more. But there's just no need to rush when you're training horses.
And quite frankly, as we all know, if we're ever on a time frame, they'll use it all up and more. So not having time frame is the best thing. Okay, cool. So we've got 2 more left to go. So we've done rider biomechanics and balance, the training environment, equine health and soundness, I can say it that time, temperament of the horse, human knowledge and skills, and the learning processes and ability. And just while you're thinking of what the final 2 are, we're remembering as well that this is all a study of ethology, which actually is, although it's a study of the horses in the wild, it's very, very relevant still to our ability to get the best out of our horse and a happy, successful partnership with our horse, even though they're not those wild beings anymore.
Yeah, there's still a horse, and regardless, say what opinions and definitions people have in horse training, the fact is a horse is still a horse, and it's been a horse for however many years. So to be able to be able
It's all right, it's fine. To be able to understand the horse in the wild helps us bring it into training, or not? Probably not what you were saying at all.
being able to understand how a horse is a horse
Yeah,
allows us to put it in situations without causing too much stress. For example, stabling a horse. We all know stabling a horse isn't good, but do the horses like really mind it? Well, the ones that obviously crib bite and we even show you they don't like being in the stable, they will let you know. But horses do cope with the way we manage them. So just, but it brings the question of just because we can manage them that way, should we?
yeah, definitely. I have to say, having seen a video of mine, and he frequently does this, it's not just a video of him the other day. Mine loves snoozing in his stable. He will lie flat on his back and snore. Well, not on his back, obviously, on his side. Snore happily. You know, the video of him the other day, he was laid down really happy, pulled all his hay to his belly, basically, and was eating it like perfectly chilled out, no problem whatsoever. So they definitely do adapt, don't they? And as long as there's no problem there or an issue that they can feel perfectly happy and safe in that environment.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
Okay.
yeah. Next
Okay. 0.7 out of 8. We're nearly there now. We've nearly done all 8 points.
So horses history.
Ah, there we go. Beautifully, actually, we could have segued so wonderfully into that then, where, you know, talking about stabling, and if they haven't known any different, then, you know, if it's all been a positive experience, why not? So yeah, horses history. Come on.
So the the main thing with horses history is that horses do retain bad memories, and if you do have a bad experience, for example, say you have a horse that has an accident in a trailer, and now he's scared to get in a trailer because he remembers that traumatic time. Um, so once again, this is where like the handler or rider has to adapt themselves to the horse and figure out if the horse is if the horse is experiencing like bad memories or anything. But a horse's history can just impact a horse so much, and the sad reality is when you get a horse and you don't know its history, you might not even know that he's had a bad experience until you're involved in an accident, you know.
So how do you think you can work with that? So obviously you don't, and most of the time, most people don't know a horse's full history.
Yeah.
Even if they've got a bit of one, it's not necessarily the truth, or it doesn't necessarily go back that far. Very, very few people know from a foal at weaning, and that really crucial part of their life, that's for certain.
Yeah.
So, like, how? So we're not necessarily going to know their history. So how do we kind of work with that then to understand it or to use it to our advantage or to be aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, the most easiest sort of way to figure out if like your horse has got any underlying bad memories is to just go about your normal day and just be quite conscious. Say if it's like a new horse, you just put the head collar on like nice and slow, and you just find out if they're head shy. But with horses, it is a case of sort of experimenting and finding out what you can with your own investigations, and then just dealing with it when the horse displays some
Yeah,
behavior.
and it sounds like going back to the training environment. It sounds like going back to breaking things down, understanding your horse, and all of that as well. So these aren't standalone 8 points; they're interlinked completely, aren't they?
Yeah, and this like goes back to say the picking and choosing of what you want to do. Say with your own sort of like best practice with you and your horse, where everything is interlinked, you can just it doesn't matter if you change one small thing, because it won't impact the rest too much, because where they're all interlinked, as long as they're all sort of there, you can do your own methods for it.
Yeah, so you don't have to just follow one thing. You can pick and choose, and as long as you're not confusing the horse, of course.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so then what is the last one of these 8? Let's do that last one for now, and then we've done all 8 of them. We can wrap it up. I've got one question for you that came in last time, which I promised I would get answered this time as well. So, what is the last one of the 8?
It was horse's confirmation. And the thing, say with like confirmation, it just comes back to, is the horse fit for purpose? Because every horse can go and do something, but it might not be a job that for one person. No, said that wrong.
That's all right. So every horse can do things, but because of their conformation, they may not necessarily be able to do the job that that person intends them to do.
Yeah.
So my understanding of this is if a horse is very thick set in its neck, for instance, it will find it very hard to really come into a big collection and bring its head up and in, because it's very thick set. It won't be able to breathe. I know this because I have a friend with beautiful Connemara that is having exactly this problem right now. He's never going to be able to have that really up and together frame from a head and neck perspective, because he's a really thick set neck, and that's not because they've trained him with the wrong muscles. That's just the way he's come out. Very short neck, very big head, and if he brings his head into that highly collected point, he's going to struggle to breathe.
Yeah. And say, like, talking about the fit for purpose, if you take in breeds into consideration, there's some breeds you wouldn't use for eventing. I mean, as much as I would enjoy seeing a Clydesdale do eventing, I don't think it would be right for its body.
Absolutely. I think the funniest thing is if a Clydesdale went eventing, the ground would shake so much. In fact, I do know a Shire cross that goes eventing, and you hear him no matter where he is on the course, because his hooves are so big. Cool, superb. Okay, so that was 8 points that we need to consider. Let me read this question to you and see what you think. I had it here ready. Right, I've acquired a very interesting 14-hand pony from the Travellers. She's a fine boned job, not a cob, but has a foal and apparently been down the road at 30 miles an hour, or has had a foal, and she's 4 years old. Her physical development is an ongoing process, but it's going the right way. But her mind is very messed up, in that she doesn't know boundaries, is confused by dominance with me. She wants attention, but can't let herself do it. It's all very odd. She also exhibits very odd behaviour in a stable, basically leans against the walls as she walks around. Not anxious, but about being in the stable, but something truly odd. I think some help from a behaviour person would be very helpful in her retraining. Any thoughts?
Well, that sounded all quite interesting, didn't it? But can you just repeat to me the bit before her rubbing herself in the stable? What was she saying?
Okay, so she's a 14-hand pony that's been acquired. She's fine bones. She's not cobby. She's had a foal. She's had a foal. Sorry, she's 4 years old, and she's been down the road at 30 miles an hour. So she's obviously a trotter. Her physical development is an ongoing process, but her mind is messed up in that she doesn't know boundaries and is confused by dominance from her owner. She wants attention, but she almost can't let herself do it. And then there's the stable behaviour as leaning.
Yeah. The first thing I would say is you can't think of it like as dominance. If you think yourself as like a leader, and for example, I've had quite a journey with this little foal and installing boundaries because he does not have foal friends. He has no other mares to tell him off, so I've had to take it upon myself. And basically, what I've done. So say if we are going in and out from the field, and say if she is barging out of the stable, if you do backing up with her, and getting her to like sort of reverse, that will help. And to be fair, you can use that as a corrective a way to correct her behaviour is getting her to take a couple of steps back. The rubbing on the walls and stuff, I mean, does she have stable friends next to her? Can she see them?
I think this is the thing with any of these, though, isn't it? Is that, I mean, I asked you that question because it's an interesting thing, but you've got to look at the whole picture. Like you say, you've got to look at these 8 elements here, haven't you? And know more about the situation and see the horse exhibiting it and know about her environment and understand more. And there's always so much more to it, isn't there, than I've got this, what do you suggest? Because there's no black and white answer, is there?
And to be fair, the horse just sounds like its job was to be put in a trap, charged down the road, and probably then just chucked back out in the field. So I wonder if she feels just quite anxious being around people, and it might even be an idea to get a chair and a book and sit in the stable and keep yourself entertained, so she just gets used to your company and sees that you aren't one of these people that's just going to chuck her in a trap and get her to bomb down the road. But there's always something you can do with horses, and it may not necessarily be something that is like a traditional method, but who cares? It's just
if it works. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so I think some of the key themes that have definitely come out of this is that there's no right or wrong, black or white answer.
Yeah.
It's got to be read by the horse. You've got to consider these 8 elements and think about them, break them down. There is almost always something to the jigsaw puzzle, but you've just got to start working out what the pieces are and how you can start to work with those pieces to create this happy, successful partnership. And if something's not working, consider any of these other elements that may or may not be correct. And if they all are, then if it's still not working, there's definitely one of them that is out.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for taking part in part 1 and part 2, for bearing with the technical fun that we've had. And if people have questions or they want to get in touch with you or want to ask you anything, what's the best way that they can do that?
I have an Instagram page, and that's about all I have.
What's your Instagram page so people can follow you and what you're up to?
I believe, I'm just double checking now, awful, isn't it?
That's right. Unless you go around telling people it's not something you particularly know, you just log in, it's there, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's Jess_horsepower. And for the ladies say who asked a question, it's so hard to get an answer when I don't know everything. So I've just tried to say quite stuff that's not necessarily going to impact the horse too much, but
that's exactly it, isn't it? And if she wants to know more from you, then she can get in touch with you. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And if anyone does want to ask any questions, they can always ask us and we can forward them on to you, and that's all cool. But it's not your profession in itself, is it? You know, this isn't what you do day in, day out. It's what you've been learning, what you've been studying, what you enjoy. And it was just lovely for you to come on and share some information with us. It was great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Hope you
You're very
enjoyed.
it was fascinating. I've made lots of notes, which is really cool. So thank you so much, Jess, for coming on. Like I say, persevering and giving us your knowledge and your wisdom, because there'll be something somewhere that someone finds really helpful and takes away and does something with it or learns more about.
Okay.
Thank you very
Lovely.
much.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.